Hey, it's Emily, and for today's video, I want to talk about a common regret I think most collectors encounter at least once in their collecting journey, and that is not buying games when they were cheap. This is a phenomenon that has always been around, but I do feel like in the last few years we've seen this heightened, especially in the modern gaming markets. And I think part of that is thanks to some of the popularity of certain consoles being very popular to collect, and also just seeing a reflection of rising prices in the retro market, and that having an effect on a lot of modern games that seemingly become very difficult to find. Now, we've seen plenty of modern titles go in and out of stock on a fairly regular basis, so sometimes it's very difficult to know whether or not a game, when it kind of leaves store shelves or it kind of disappears online for a little bit, whether or not it's going to reappear in stock or not. For example, we've seen this with Blue Reflection on the PS4 that for the longest time was out of stock and didn't see a reprint anywhere, but then it did eventually get a reprint and it's become much easier to find at MSRP or below. So I want to take the time and share my list of games that have gone out of stock seemingly, but have not reappeared on the market, and I'm kind of regretting not getting them when they were much cheaper. And before we start, I want to make note that I am only restricting this to a few select systems that were still active at the time I was collecting back in 2013. And so I'm going to start off with kind of the first system that got me back into game collecting, and that is the 3DS. And so I have shared in a previous video a FOMO behind plenty of 3DS games right before the eShop was officially closed. And despite doing that, there were still a few select games that I missed out on that I kind of regret not buying sooner, and especially not buying when they were still available at MSRP or on clearance. So the first one I want to talk about, to get it out of the way, because I think this is probably the 3DS title that comes to many people's minds, is Yokai Watch 3. So I do own the first and one of the second games, and this is such a unique monster taming and battling game that hasn't been ported to any other system. So it's really all locked onto the 3DS, and I'm really not sure if Level 5 will ever port it in the future. It's totally possible because this has a tie-in with Nintendo, but there doesn't seem to be as much demand for this, or at least new entries of this series anymore, due to kind of a decline in popularity, which is a shame because I've heard so much high praise for the third game as well as the fourth game that was on the Switch, and I'm not really sure if we will ever see those become in circulation again. And at this time, I'm definitely not paying those prices that Yokai Watch 3 is going for. And then another regret in a similar vein is not buying all those long boxes that were released by Atlas and Sega. I really love the long boxes that I do currently own, and I especially am really happy that I picked up Radiant Historia Perfect Chronology when it came out towards the end of the 3DS life cycle to get that launch edition long box. But there are a few games that I did end up missing, unfortunately, that I just got the standard release, such as Shin Megami Tensei 4, which is actually a game I bought, I would say, fairly close to launch, so it was a shame I didn't get the launch edition for that. As well as Stellar Glow, I think would have been another nice long box I would have loved to have owned. And then the last long box that I would have loved for my collection, or in this case, loved to have kept in my collection, is Etrian Odyssey Nexus. So to keep this rather short, I unfortunately did sell my copy of Etrian Odyssey Nexus, which I don't think I've talked about on this channel. And this was shortly after getting this game super discounted, I think on clearance from Amazon for like $28. And at the time when I received it, I wasn't really sure I would have enough time to play it. And I was kind of still figuring out how I wanted to go about collecting video games. And I was also in the middle of multiple long moves at the time, so I really didn't have the ability to bring a lot of things back and forth with me during school and some work obligations. And so I ended up selling that game, and I basically just got back what I paid for it. And this is another regret of mine because looking at the prices now, I'm not really sure if I could stomach paying those to get it back. And then the last 3DS game I want to talk about is an RPG that I really wish I got much cheaper than it's currently going for. And when I was building my 3DS collection, I had the intention of getting most of the RPGs available on the system. since there are just so many great ones. And one of the ones that I ended up missing out on was Moko Moko Friends. So this was a much different RPG than any of the other games available on the system, which really made me intrigued about it to see kind of how it would play. And I've heard mixed things still of how enjoyable it is to play. Some say that it's rather simple and not that great, while others really enjoyed it. So I'm still kind of wondering what camp I would be in, whether or not this is a game I really would have loved or one that I just maybe would think is just so-so. So these are the 3DS games that are still missing from my collection that I regret not buying when they were cheap. Next, I want to briefly talk about the PS4, which I have a fairly sizable collection, and I have most of the games that I really want on the system because I really wanted to prioritize a lot of the RPGs as well as some of the action adventure and 3D action platformers available on the system. And there are still things that I still would like to pick up that are thankfully not too expensive yet. But there are a couple things that I unfortunately did pay up for, which I'll just briefly mention, and that was Gravity Rush Remastered, as well as the special box editions of Trails of Cold Steel 1 and 2. In the case of Gravity Rush Remastered, I did buy that a couple months back, so it's still a relatively new purchase for me, so I don't have a ton of regrets paying for that, and I kind of offset it with some Amazon gift cards, so I didn't feel quite the pain of paying, I think it was around $80 or so, compared to its original MSRP price. But the Trails of Cold Steel special editions that included their steel books, I did definitely pay up for those, and I also had to actually get the PAL editions for them as well because the ESRB versions were much more expensive and almost unobtainable prices at the time. I was actively trying to seek it out. I still remember the time I had both of those games in my Amazon cart ready to buy, and I was actually selling my PS Vita versions of those two games in order to kind of upgrade to those remastered HD versions on the PS4. So I was waiting for those Vita versions to sell so that I could then purchase the upgraded PS4 enhanced versions with the steelbook and some of the other kind of goodies inside. So unfortunately, I kind of delayed purchasing the PS4 editions despite selling the Vita versions because I was in the middle of moving across the country. So I unfortunately just missed, I think, the window to get those while they were still cheap. And then I kind of put off buying them because I was a little frustrated of them kind of just slipping out of my hands. And then I ended up going on eBay and buying those PAL copies eventually. Now for this video, I'm not going to talk about the limited print run publishers like Limited Run Games, with the exception of this one game, or rather the series that I really regret not getting PS4 copies of them, and that is the Jak and Daxter franchise. I really don't need these games physically on the PS4, but I do have regrets of not buying those, especially not those collector's editions that they were selling, because those were beautiful. And maybe someday we'll get those again as PS5 versions, because Limited Run Games tends to do that with some of their titles, especially the more popular titles. But I think at this time I'm probably just going to buy my nostalgic PS2 games because I'm still kind of missing the boxes for most of those. Now we jump to the PS5, which is one of the newest consoles on the market right now, and unfortunately it has suffered in having some titles totally disappear from stock. So one of them is one of the rather obvious ones, and that is Final Fantasy VII Remake for the PS5. And this is one I really didn't need to upgrade to a PS5, but it would have been nice to have it be cohesive with the rest of the remake kind of trilogy that they're building towards, along with Crisis Core Reunion, which I also have on the PS5. So this is more of a collecting regret in that I'm not going to have a nice cohesive collection for Final Fantasy VII. And really, I don't need to upgrade to the PS5 version because I already own the PS4 version. And the PS5 version, while it does have the DLC included, it's only a code in the box, so it's not even on the disc, and kind of makes the upgrades less desirable. But I do recall when the PS5 versions of Remake were, I think, going on Walmart for like $25, and they were kind of flash clearance sales, and I'm kind of wishing I picked that up even before I got a PS5 just to secure it. But the other PS5 game that I'm generally surprised that kind of disappeared super quickly, and we haven't seen any restock of it, or having, say, Video Games Plus kind of come in and help make that restock happen, is for Ys 9 Monstrum Nox. So Ys 9 is on multiple systems, and I actually do own it on the Switch right now, but it is really not the best way to own that physically because it has a forced download if you wanted to complete the game. And it's also super buggy and doesn't run the best on the Switch, unfortunately. So I was really looking forward to the PS5 version, and I kind of put off buying it because I was buying so many other games I think that were going on sale at the time, back in towards the tail end of, I think, 2003-ish. But I kind of put it on the back burner because I was scooping up a lot of other games that were heavily discounted and kind of building up my PlayStation collection, thinking at the time that Ys 9 just came out on the PS5, so copies should still probably be readily available since it's a game that's been available on multiple systems already. So now the game goes well above MSRP, and I'm still patiently waiting for it to get reprinted or come back in stock of some sort from NIS America. So I'm hoping that happens maybe after Ys 10 comes out, but you would think that they would restock leading up to the new release. But I guess we didn't see that with Final Fantasy VII Remake with Rebirth that came out this year for whatever reason. And finally, I want to talk about all the Switch games I missed out on while they were still cheap. And again, I'm kind of avoiding all the limited run games because there are a handful that I kind of wished I picked up at the time but didn't, but focus more on the retail type of games. The first one I want to talk about was one that kind of surprisingly got out of stock out of nowhere. After sitting in my cart, I think for under $20 for quite a while, and I was kind of waiting to pull the trigger on it, but inevitably didn't, and now it's going for much more than MSRP, and that is Signalis. I think one of the reasons why I didn't jump on it, even though I did notice it go on sale, I must say maybe 3 months back, is because it is a genre that I'm not too familiar with, and so I wasn't really certain whether or not it'd be a game I would fully enjoy or not, despite hearing a lot of praise for the game. And I really loved the art direction and kind of the atmosphere and mood of footage I've seen from the game itself. So maybe this one, like some of the other titles I'll be talking about, will get a reprint eventually, fingers crossed. But if not, I'm just gonna maybe buy it on a different system, even though it would have been cool to have it on the Switch. The next game is a Bandai Namco store exclusive game that I don't know why didn't have a wider release, and that was for Digimon World Next Order. Now, you can still find this game really cheap on the PS4, so I'm probably going to go that route eventually because I do want to buy more Digimon games, because it would have been nice to have a Digimon side collection, because there's the Cyber Sleuth games and Digimon Survive and maybe more in the future. So it's a pity that I couldn't get that on the Switch, but at least the PS4 version's still around. So I'll probably have to look into that sooner rather than later to make sure I get a copy. And then another game I want to talk about is sort of through a limited print publisher, though this also did see a Best Buy retail release, and that is for Carto. So this is a charming indie game that has these different tiles you move around to form your map and have your characters move, and it just looks like a really nice, refreshing indie title release. And I remember seeing this both on the I Am 8-Bit store as well as Best Buy and a few other retailers who were selling the I Am 8-Bit games. But it's just another case of not prioritizing it before it eventually went out of stock and out of print. There are a few other I Am 8-Bit games that I wish I prioritized a bit sooner, like Donut County, as well as that expensive collection that they had with I forget how many games from that studio. That would have been really cool to own, even though it was difficult to justify the price tag for that game at the time. But thankfully, it does look like I Am 8-Bit is shifting more towards retail and wider release for their games. So I'm curious to see kind of how their stock situation will continue kind of moving forward with some of their bigger titles like Sea of Stars and a few others that they have in the works. So the last Switch game that I regret not buying while it was still cheap is the Child of Light Ultimate Edition. And this was actually available in a double pack along with Valiant Hearts. So what's really cool about this edition that wasn't a feature of the previous releases, say on the Vita and other systems, is that you get the entire game on the cartridge, including all the DLC. So it's definitely, I think, a physical that's worth owning, and kind of one that I wish I would have scooped up before I knew about it. Because this is a game, at the time, I didn't know how to physical released here in North America on the Switch. So these were just a handful of games that I regret not buying while they were still cheap. But who knows, maybe some of them will reemerge and become widely available again. So that's kind of the hope. But if that's not the case, I'm going to have to make a decision whether or not to kind of pay up for a couple of these games that I really do want to own physically in my collection, or kind of allow them to slip through the cracks and hope that maybe they'll get a release on a future system of some sort. So let me know if you also have any regrets of not buying games while they were still cheap. I'm sure many of us have stories not only on the systems that I just talked about today, but also on other systems of this phenomenon also occurring. It's always very validating to connect with others who feel a similar sense of regret kind of regarding this aspect of collecting, and also kind of learn from each other of really wanting to prioritize the games we want in our collection rather than kind of letting them on the wayside and allowing them to kind of rise up in price unintentionally. But that's everything for this video, and until my next one, bye guys.